Arthur was never one to make conversation unless necessary. In his 60 years of existence, he had never thought a day would come when he would voluntarily engage in banter with anyone, let alone a 14-year-old girl. Every Sunday, Arthur would come to the park. It helped calm his mind, sort his thoughts, and stay close to the memory of the only person he had ever truly loved. A ray of sunlight amidst his gloomy skies, Annalise, Arthur's wife, was his polar opposite. Feeding the ducks at the park every week was their tradition, one that she had initiated, of course. At the crack of dawn, Annalise would drag Arthur out of bed and to the park, while he groaned and complained. Although he would never admit it, this was his favorite part of the week. There was something between the two of them in the silence that they shared those mornings in the company of the ducks, the morning fog, and each other that transcended both words or touch. For 35 years, he was the happiest man alive. Until he wasn't. Fate and a drunk driver whom he swore he would never forgive had decided to take the one good thing in his life away from him early last year. Since then, he had almost forgotten the sound of his own voice. He had no close friends, no close family, and no Annalise. Apart from brief interactions with the cashier at the grocery store, the friendly neighbor who always said hello, or the almost estranged relatives checking up on him to see if he was still alive, he only had himself and his thoughts to keep him company. That was, until today. The bench at the park that he usually sat at was empty most days. Not many people would choose feeding ducks at 6 a.m. on Sunday mornings over sleep. So imagine his surprise, and slight annoyance, when, not 5 minutes after his own arrival, his alone time was rudely interrupted by a young girl. She was a sight to see. Although fully decked in black with a hood that covered most of her face, the first thing he could not help but notice was her eyes. There was a brightness in them that he could not seem to comprehend. She seemed wary at first, furtively glancing behind her as though she was being followed. Once she was certain that there was no one else there, she finally approached Arthur. "Hello," she greeted, louder than he would have liked, with a smile that did not quite seem to reach her eyes. He nodded, barely acknowledging her, before diverting his attention back to the ducks. She sat beside him timidly, leaving enough of a gap between the two of them so as not to invade his personal space. "Do you come here often?" she asked. Arthur did not want to engage in small talk, but there was no one else around them, and it was too quiet for him to pretend not to have heard her. He nodded in response once again. She did not seem bothered or disheartened by his unwillingness to engage in conversation with her at all. In fact, it almost seemed as though she was becoming comfortable in his company, her rigid, petite frame slightly relaxing. She joined him in gazing at the ducks as the creatures waddled competitively toward the remaining pieces of bread that were scattered all around them. For a while, neither of them spoke. Arthur did not seem to mind her presence anymore. "Did you know that ducklings talk to each other, even before they've hatched?" He finally looked at her. "What do you mean?" he asked. "They communicate so they can hatch in sync," she responded excitedly. "Wow, that is actually really sweet," Arthur responded. She had finally got Arthur to talk to her. Feeling accomplished, she hesitated before asking, "What is your good name, sir?" "Arthur. And you?" he questioned. "Annalise. But everyone calls me Anna," she responded, grinning. Arthur froze. "What did you just say?" "I'm Anna. It's nice to meet you." She held out her hand. Still startled, he hesitantly shook it. Relieved that he was finally acknowledging her and did not seem nearly as annoyed as he had been initially, she started making small talk and asking him questions. Personal ones, mind you. Strangely enough, Arthur was enjoying it. It had been a while since anyone had last shown any interest in him and his life. As a matter of fact, the last person he could remember making this much of an effort to indulge in a discussion with him before this little girl was his wife. Of course, he told the little girl all about her. An hour had passed, although neither of them seemed to feel it, when Anna asked, "If you don't mind, could I use your phone? I need to call my mom." It was a small ask, but Arthur noticed that she seemed nervous. Either it was the fact that he had taken a liking to her, or, more so likely, that sharing the same name as his beloved made him feel connected to this child somehow. Arthur didn't think twice before he handed over his device to his new acquaintance. She smiled in thanks, and walked far enough away to make the call in private. He could not hear what she was saying, but he could see her hands moving animatedly. As the girl started pacing across the field, her discreet murmurs turned into louder debate, and in no time, she was yelling into the phone. She was too far away for Arthur to see her face, but from the quiver and strain in her screams, he realized she was crying. He wanted to approach her, but it had been a while since he had last tried to comfort an individual in distress, and he did not want to overstep. His contemplation did not last long before Anna came storming up to him. It took one look at her face for him to understand that the brightness in her eyes, now gleaming even more than before, was a rage that had no intention of subsiding. She had hidden it well before, but her anger was very much there now, written all over her face for the world to see. She had not even bothered wiping the tears off her face, but her face immediately changed into what one might consider cheerful when she saw Arthur looking at her in concern, her smile once again refusing to reach her eyes. "Thank you so much for letting me take this call. I'm glad that you are the last person I get to talk to before I leave. Live a long life, Sir Arthur. I'm sure your wife would want you to be happy." Before he could process what Anna had said, she grabbed her bag and rushed off, not looking back even for a second. The last person to talk to before she leaves? Arthur wondered. He was conflicted, anxious, and deeply concerned. Where was she going in such a rush? What had made her so upset? Was she going to be okay? The girl could not have been over 14, and yet she had conversed with him with such maturity and eloquence that Arthur found it almost peculiar. What was she doing by herself so early in the morning? His train of thought was broken by the high-pitched ringing of his phone. He was confused. He usually never got calls. His phone was merely an accessory. There was no caller ID, and he had no idea who could be calling him at such a time. Just when he was about to decline, he suddenly thought of Anna. Could this call be for her? Still apprehensive, he answered, "Hello? Anna? Wait, who is this?" The lady on the phone sounded utterly distressed. "Arthur, Anna just left. Who is this?" Arthur was right. It was for Anna. "I'm her mom. What do you mean she just left? And since when has she known Arthur? Never mind that. Do you know where she went at least?" Anna's mom's voice had dwindled from a high-pitched shriek to an urgent whisper by the end. "No clue. She seemed to be in a rush." "Tell me where you are, please. I need to find her. I don't know where she may go or what she may do to herself. I want her back. I'll change, I promise. Please help me. Please help us." Arthur was conflicted. Would Anna want her mom to come looking for her? She seemed furious when talking to her mom over the phone earlier. Maybe Anna was trying to escape. At the same time, he also knew she was a minor. There was no way she could survive by herself. He did not know enough to decide if leaving her to fend for herself was the most responsible decision in a situation like this. Additionally, her mom truly did sound agonized by her daughter's disappearance. Dubiously, he responded, "I'm at Riverside Park. This is where I last spoke to her. What is going on?" "I'll leave at once. I'll tell you everything once I get there," she whispered back, and Arthur could hear her feet shuffle towards what he presumed was the car. He had just heard her door shut when he heard a rough male voice vehemently scream, "Where do you think you're going?" He could hear her breathing quicken over the phone as she locked the vehicle and hurriedly turned the engine on. "May, if you leave this garage, I will hunt you down and kill both you and your wretched daughter." May started sobbing. "I need to find her. I need to find her," she repeated to herself multiple times. Arthur had now come to a conclusion of sorts as to what was going on. He was distraught for both May and Anna. Yesterday, Arthur would have concluded that this matter did not concern him in any way, and the most he could do on his part would have been to contact the police. Right at this moment, he was too worried for Anna and her mom to even consider leaving it at that. After his interaction with Anna, he had felt an almost granddaughterly affection towards her. His brain was pounding, and his heart was racing. He knew he had to get the help of the police, not just to find Anna, but also to protect her mom. At the same time, he knew that May was still on the phone because Arthur was all she had right now, a sole witness to the abuse, even if he was not physically present. What could he possibly do right now? He could hear violent banging on the door of May's car, her sobs growing consistently louder and uncontrollable. Arthur had never felt more burdened in his entire life. He took a moment to calm himself down first before attempting to advise May. Arthur was still unsettled, but he did his best to sound composed just for her. "All the doors of your car are locked, right, May?" he gently asked. "Yes," she cried. "You're going to be fine, I promise. He can't hurt you while you are still in there, okay?" He consoled her. "Can I put you on hold while I call the police?" he asked. "Please don't leave. Anna ran away not just from her father, but from me as well. She kept asking me to come with her so that we could go somewhere safe, but I did my best to discourage her. I promised that her dad would eventually change and that we could get through this as a family. Even this morning, instead of hearing her out and considering her pleas, I disregarded everything she was saying and asked her to stop being silly, to just come home. This is all my fault, and I could never forgive myself if something happens to her. She's all I have left. You need to help me, please." Arthur understood why May wouldn't trust that Arthur himself wouldn't abandon them at a time like this. He needed to reassure her, but he also needed to act fast. There was no way an old man like himself could search the city for Anna and protect May alone. It was physically impossible. "I'm not going to leave you. I'm going to call the police. You need to trust me, May. That's the only way we can get out of this," Arthur gently persuaded. She took a deep, shaky breath before saying, "Okay." He put her on hold and dialed 911 as quickly as possible, despite his trembling hands almost failing him. The 15 minutes that followed were a total blur. So much happened all at once. Arthur had successfully managed to reach the local police, and they reached May, tracking her via her cell phone since Arthur had kept her on hold. They arrived at her place a minute after her abusive husband had ripped away the door of the car from its hinges. He had managed to get her, but thankfully, had not had time to inflict any more than minor injuries on his poor wife. She was shaken up, but safe. They could not say the same for Anna, however. It had been 6 hours since anyone had last seen or spoken to her. The dispatched police officers were doing their best, but to no avail. In his old age, Arthur felt like he was of no use, but he could not put his mind at rest. A part of him felt like this was his fault. He should never have let a little girl go off by herself, especially after her questionable departing statement. Her tone had been definitive and final, almost as though she was saying goodbye. He knew this was out of his control. Overwhelmed by his thoughts of the worst that could have happened, he decided to return to the one place that put him at ease. At times like these, only Annalise, his wife, had known how to calm him down. The park was where he felt closest to her. He made his way there for a second time that day, racking his brain to remember if she had given him the slightest hint about her whereabouts during their conversations. Nothing came to mind. He thought of the petite girl engulfed in the black outfit that seemed to be twice her size. It all made sense now. He recalled as Anna flinched as she sat, or how every time her sleeve would ride up slightly while she was feeding the ducks, she hastened to pull it back down, as though she did not want anyone to see. The signs were there, but he had been too caught up in his thoughts to even pay heed to her odd mannerisms at the time. He was almost at his self-designated spot when his eyes landed on a dark bundle on the floor next to the bench. Anyone else would not have spared it a second glance. As he got closer, he could see how the silhouette trembled as it sobbed. His heart pounded faster with every breath he took. He hoped, no, he prayed that he was right. It had to be her. "Anna?" The bundle of clothes stopped moving. "It's me, Arthur." Slowly but surely, Arthur watched as a sodden face emerged from between the heap on the floor. She looked exhausted, angry, and terrified. The brightness in her eyes was gone, and there was barely any life in her. Carefully, with all the energy left in him, Arthur lifted her off the ground and onto the bench. The poor girl did not protest or help with his task. Arthur was worried sick at her state, but more than anything, he was relieved. He could not help but smile as he gently detached himself from Anna's weak grasp to inform the police officers and, more importantly, her mom, that her daughter had returned. He could hear her mom immediately break out in tears. She pleaded with him to let her speak to Anna, and Arthur held the phone out to her with a gentle smile, just for Anna to push it away. She shook her head. Arthur was slightly annoyed. "She's been looking for you all morning. The least you could do is apologize." Anna faced him. She looked like she would break into tears again at any moment. His eyes softened. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to raise my voice at you. What's the matter?" And the tears poured. "I can't go back to him. I don't care if he hurts me, but I can't watch the way he treats Mama anymore. I won't go back." "You don't have to," Arthur consoled her. She raised her head. "What do you mean?" "They took him away. You're safe now. You and your mom have the house to yourselves." Her eyes widened, and before you knew it, they were full of tears again. Except this time, she was crying because she was relieved. She was happy. She could finally wake up in the morning without having to worry about taking her mom to the hospital, either because the egg she had fried was slightly too runny for her dad, or because he didn't like the t-shirt she was wearing. She had never known a life without abuse. Until now, it almost felt too good to be true. After Anna had finally calmed down, the two of them slowly walked to the police car that May had come in. It was a tearful reunion, of course, and Arthur could not have been happier. Before they left, Anna turned to Arthur and said, "I'm glad I met you. See you next Sunday. This time I'll bring the bread." Arthur laughed. So much for alone time. Through Arthur, Anna had found her way out. In Anna, Arthur had found himself a friend.